I am Cecilia Winthrop. No one ever calls me Cecilia, though. The name is printed across my birth certificate, if that certificate still exists somewhere. On my household registry, tucked within the Winthrop Family Trust archives, buried inside stacks of tax documents mailed to the penthouse each year and filed straight into a miscellaneous folder by Mrs. Tanning, I exist only as a half-erased ghost. The Winthrops call me Cece. The sound is sharp, weightless, like a coin dropped onto velvet, every echo swallowed instantly into silence. It took me 17 years to untangle a single brutal truth. Why Caroline Winthrop watched me as if peering through one-way glass at a mannequin locked inside a shop window. Why Richard Winthrop could cross paths with me 16 times out of 17 by the fireplace and fail to recall my name each time. Why Preston owned a wall lined with first editions and a private piano room overlooking Central Park, while all I possessed was a fold-out military cot, a rickety wooden shelf barely wide enough for 3 books, and a battered leather trunk tucked in the corner serving as a makeshift nightstand. Autumn arrived when I turned 17, and Preston announced his engagement. His fiancée was Annabelle Sterling. The Sterling surname carried an innate, polished refinement when spoken between the brownstone townhouses lined with brass address plaques of Manhattan's Upper East Side. Annabelle's father, Walter Sterling, had managed the Winthrop Family Trust and all their legal affairs for over 50 years. He sported a neatly trimmed band of gray whiskers, and whenever he spoke, he tapped the table gently with his right index finger, a finger adorned with a gold signet ring etched with the Winthrop family crest, gifted to him by the clan 30 years prior. When my father Richard shook his hand, their palms lingered pressed together 2 full seconds longer than basic social etiquette demanded. It was a silent covenant shared between men of identical standing. We stand on the same side, we speak the same unspoken language, our children are meant to bind our bloodlines together. The night Preston's engagement was formalized, the Winthrops hosted an intimate dinner party in their Park Avenue penthouse. Only 6 of us filled the dining room, my parents, Preston, Mr. and Miss Sterling, and me. Annabelle sat at the eastern end of the table, facing Central Park's treetops blazed amber and burnt crimson by the fall frost. She wore a mist blue silk slip dress, a thin platinum chain looped around her neck holding a pearl no bigger than a grain of rice. Every word she uttered at the table rang out like a finely tuned instrument plucked soft and slow, volume, cadence, and trailing syllables calibrated to perfection, neither too eager nor too distant, as if she'd rehearsed every line 100 times over. Preston sat directly across from me. He'd pulled on a charcoal cashmere sweater, sleeves rolled midway up his forearms to reveal a pale curved scar left from university squash matches, a silvery parenthesis carved into his skin. He barely glanced my way. He answered Annabelle's idle questions about summer villas in the south of France with effortless poise, consulted Mr. Sterling on hedge fund logistics, and offered a lazy, practiced smile when my mother floated the question of honeymoon destinations, Machu Picchu versus Santorini. All the while, his fingers twisted the hand-embroidered silk border of the tablecloth, a subconscious, quiet act of soothing something unnameable inside him. As the dinner drew to a close, Annabelle's gaze drifted past the silver candelabra centered on the table and settled on my face. "Cece," she said, "are you free tomorrow? I'm heading to Madison Avenue to try on wedding gowns, and Preston's tied up with a board meeting. Would you come with me?" Preston lifted his eyes to me for half a heartbeat. He did not answer for me, nor did he soften the request with polite deflection. His stare skimmed my features like a leaf gliding across still water, sinking no weight, leaving no trace behind. "She's free," Caroline cut in from the opposite end of the table. She dressed that evening in a deep emerald velvet suit, tiny emerald-cut diamond studs glinting at her earlobes. The cold refracted light caught the permanent slight upward tilt of her jawline. Cece's schedule is flexible, unlike the rest of us. She can escort Miss Sterling after she finishes folding the dry cleaning downstairs tomorrow. Just make certain you don't keep her out too long. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. My voice spilled flat and unyielding, plain water poured into a porcelain bowl, void of warmth or flavor. Annabelle studied me for a beat. Her hazel eyes flickered in candlelight, churning like a complex actuarial program crunching numbers yet unable to land on a final calculation. She smiled at me, the exact same smile she'd bestowed on every other guest at the table, an arc measured to the millimeter, neat rows of teeth visible, lips lifted just enough to curve her eyes into soft crescent moons. But beneath that polished grin lurked something trapped, a moth thrashing beneath a folded sheet of newspaper. Once the guests departed, I cleared silver flatware and bone china from the table, folded Christopher linen napkins and stowed them in drawers, then polished away faint fingerprints smudged across Caroline's crystal wine glasses, each mark left by her habit of twisting the stem between her fingers as she sipped. I retreated to my cramped quarters at the far end of the staff wing. The servants' quarters occupied the innermost rear of the penthouse. To reach my door, you walked past the kitchen, laundry room, and housekeeper's office, crossed a concrete room housing 3 industrial-grade washing machines, then turned down a narrow corridor barely wide enough for one person to pass. No house number, no nameplate marked my room, only a brass doorknob worn smooth from years of constant twisting. Inside waited my military cot, flimsy wooden shelf, beat-up leather trunk, and a tiny window opening onto a concrete service courtyard. Beyond the glass loomed a dull gray brick wall, a scrawny, undernourished fern sprouting stubbornly from a crack in the mortar. On winter evenings, frigid air seeped through the window seams, creeping up the walls to settle heavy on my shoulders like an icy hand closing slow around my bones. I perched on the edge of my cot and dragged a palm-sized plastic vanity mirror from the trunk's bottom layer, cast off by Mrs. Tanning during a guest room overhaul, its frame chipped along one edge to expose raw white plastic. I swept my hair back behind my ears and stared at my reflection. My high cheekbones matched Caroline's. My sharp jawline mirrored Richard's. My deep-set, slightly upturned eyes bore Preston's exact shape. Once, I dismissed all these shared features as coincidence, side effects of growing up under the same roof for so long, my soft features slowly molding to match the Winthrop lineage. Now, pressing my fingertips hard enough against my cheekbones to whiten my nails, I traced Caroline's likeness behind my own reflection. What separated us? Was it blood, or something far heavier? I flipped the mirror face down and tucked it beneath the cot's straw mattress. Resting there was a square scrap of yellowed paper, edges frayed and thin, covered in Preston's messy yet neat blue ink handwriting. Drink plenty of water, don't drag yourself out of bed to work tomorrow. He'd slipped it beside my makeshift nightstand 3 years prior, the night I spiked a fever of 104 degrees. Mrs. Tanning found it the next morning while changing my sheets, holding the slip for 5 full seconds as her face shut down like louvered blinds slamming closed, every flicker of warmth extinguished. She crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash, but I'd snatched it out unseen, smoothed the creases flat, and kept it pressed close ever since. I'd run my fingers over those ink lines so many times the blue pigment had blurred into faint pale cyan water stains. Still, I could recite every stroke blind, the horizontal bars, sharp vertical slants, the lazy upward tilt of each ending letter. It was Preston's handwriting, much like the boy himself, privileged, unhurried, gentle yet incomplete. I'd spent countless hours dissecting that incompleteness. Preston was never cruel to me, not once. He'd ruffle my hair as he passed in the hallway, the same way one might pet a stray cat wandering past. On Christmas Eve, he'd sneak a roasted chestnut from the dinner buffet and press it into my palm, his fingertips still warm from the oven. When he returned from overseas vacations, he'd slip small trinkets into the kitchen counter, silk scarves, lipstick tubes, chocolate boxes grabbed mindlessly from airport duty-free shops, unsigned, unmentioned, yet I always knew who they belonged to. These tiny gestures lit a faint, steady flame deep in my chest through endless gray winters, dim yet unextinguished, bioluminescence burning far beneath the ocean's surface. But that kindness floated like oil atop water, iridescent and pretty, incapable of holding any real depth. The second Mrs. Tanning's voice echoed down the hall calling him to riding lessons. He'd drop his hand from my hair and walk away without a single backward glance, his palm slipping into his wool coat pocket as if our brief interaction had never occurred. That Christmas Eve he left chocolate for me. I lingered on the staircase landing and overheard his conversation with Caroline. I picked up an extra box of chocolates for Cece, nothing more. Her reply faded halfway to my ears, only the final line cutting clear. Don't grow too fond of her, she'll lose sight of where she stands. Preston fell silent for 2 heartbeats before answering. What difference would it make? She's just a kid. Lose sight of where she stands. What exactly had that phrase meant in that moment? Would I confuse gratitude with entitlement? Mistake casual charity for genuine belonging? I had no answer back then. That night, I unwrapped every chocolate and lined them neatly across my cot's pillow, 3 rows of 4 gleaming gold foil wrappers glowing like tiny coins in my dim room. I did not touch a single piece, sealing the box away at the trunk's base alongside the faded note. Summer's sweltering courtyard heat turned the chocolates to mush months later. Foil stuck sticky to my fingers when I pulled the trunk out to air, dark brown syrup seeping into the cotton lining beneath. I dragged the trunk out onto the brick courtyard floor to dry, peeling crumpled gold foil from my skin, the cloying sweet residue clinging stubbornly to every crevice of my fingertips. Sat cross-legged on cold brick, I realized those candies were a perfect metaphor, tenderness left out far past its expiration date, spoiled and irreparable. The Winthrop household operated with a rigid, unyielding texture, dense and polished as a silver platter hammered smooth over decades, every object assigned an unchanging fixed place. At 6 o'clock sharp each morning, Mrs. Tanning's footsteps echoed down the corridor, a steady thud-thud-thud as reliable as a metronome. At 6:30, Caroline's coffee was delivered in a Sevres porcelain cup, paired with a tiny dish of skim milk and half a sugar cube, dropped precisely 7 seconds after the coffee poured, stirred 2.5 full rotations with a silver spoon before settling to the bottom. At 7, Preston's bedroom door creaked open a crack. He emerged in a silk morning robe, hair rumpled, bare feet padding across thick carpet, voice thick with sleep. "Cece, coffee." I waited around the corner with an identical Sevres cup prepared to his exact specifications. He never glanced my way, merely stretched out a hand to grasp the mug. Our fingertips occasionally brushed, his cold, carrying the low body temperature of someone fresh out of bed. At 7:30, Richard's study lamp flickered to life. He drank black coffee with no sugar, served in thicker white ceramic mugs built to retain heat longer. He set the cup atop a brass coaster resting on the upper left corner of his mahogany desk, picking up his first business call simultaneously, speaking in a steady low tone buzzing with quiet tension to kick off another day of endless dealings. I slipped out of the room, the door clicking softly shut behind me. My permitted movement range was sharply delineated through daylight hours: kitchen, laundry room, housekeeper's office, narrow staff corridors, Preston's master suite, and occasionally Caroline's walk-in closet. I orbited the Winthrop family like a planet locked into an unalterable trajectory, circling stars that would never fully draw me into their system. After 10,000 rotations around them, I'd nearly forgotten I possessed my own gravity, my own capacity to shine, to be the center of something entirely my own. One snowy evening in early February, I carried folded clean linens out of the laundry room when my foot slid across a patch of marble dampened by melting snow tracked inside from outdoors. My flat-soled shoes lost traction instantly. I pitched backward, armfuls of shirts and trousers scattering across the floor as my elbow slammed hard against the gilded full-length mirror mounted on the wall. A dull, resonant shudder rippled through the glass before the entire frame tore loose and crashed onto the marble, shattering into hundreds of jagged shards. Slivers of glass sprayed everywhere, slicing a deep gash along my forearm, dark blood seeping down my inner skin to drip onto the piles of white dress shirts and charcoal blazers. I knelt amid the wreckage, frozen for 2 seconds before reaching down to gather the sharp fragments by hand. Tiny shards pierced my palms, sharp stabs making me flinch and pull my hands back. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor, Mrs. Tanning approaching. She halted directly before me, staring down at my kneeling form surrounded by broken glass. Her face hardened into a frozen vintage photograph, devoid of expression, yet her eyes betrayed a tangled emotion I could not name, the shock of witnessing something she'd long anticipated, yet dreaded witnessing all the same. She held her silence several beats before speaking. Stand up. Head to the first aid station to dress that wound. I'll clear this mess. I pushed myself upright, hiding my bloodied palms behind my back to conceal the countless tiny cuts embedded in my skin. My forearm continued to bleed steadily, dark brown spots blooming across the cuffs of my faded gray-blue knit sweater as I stepped past her. Before I could move further, she caught my wrist with a gentle yet unshakable grip. Her thumb pressed firm against my pulse for 2 full seconds. That scar running along your inner forearm, she said, her voice dropped half an octave lower than usual. Where did you get it? I glanced down at the pale raised line stretching 3 fingers above my wrist all the way to the crook of my elbow, faded smooth by time like a worn-down earthen dam. I remembered every detail of its origin. 6 years old, working kitchen chores in midwinter, I'd knocked over a boiling pot of milk. Scalding liquid flooded my arm, sending me crumpling to the tile floor, biting my lip raw to muffle screams. Mrs. Tanning dragged me to the sink and ran cold water over the burn for 10 minutes straight, slathered ointment across the raw skin, wrapped gauze tight, then ordered me back to my room to hide before Caroline caught sight of my injured state. That evening, Preston wandered into the kitchen drawn by the smell of burnt dairy. He spotted me huddled in the corner, arms swaddled in thick bandages, tear tracks streaked across my cheeks. He knelt down to match my eye level, studying the gauze intently, then brushed a single fingertip lightly against my knuckles. Does it hurt? I lied and told him no. He stood, rummaged in the refrigerator, and set a small strawberry pudding container on my knee before walking away. His fingertips had been cool against mine that night as he knelt beside me, his gaze clear and unclouded, stripped of the quiet detachment that always lingered between us later on. I'd preserved that memory for years beneath glass, a specimen sealed away safe from distortion. Countless dark sleepless nights, I'd revisit that brief moment, dissecting every detail searching for confirmation. Had he truly cared for me as a person, or merely offered fleeting pity to a wounded small creature? I never found a solid answer. The scar faded with each passing year, yet the memory thickened, heavy enough I could no longer separate genuine memory from comfort stories I'd woven for myself to survive bitter winter nights. Mrs. Tanning lifted her thumb from my pulse, her gaze lingering on the burned scar before her lips parted, only to clamp shut without a single word. She stepped backward, sliding seamlessly back into her unflappable housekeeper demeanor. Get your injury bandaged. Then come upstairs, Madam wishes to see you. Madam. Caroline. I changed into a clean gray-blue pullover with extra long cuffs to cover the fresh gauze wrapped around my forearm and walked to the East Wing sitting room reserved for Caroline's private use. She sat in a Louis XV velvet armchair, snow swirling thick against the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, blanketing Central Park's treetops in pure white. She clutched a porcelain teacup loosely in her palms, not drinking, merely rubbing her fingertips back and forth along the ceramic surface as if counting invisible seconds. Sit, she ordered. I lowered myself onto a low stool positioned across from her, the seat short enough my eyes barely reached her chest. She stared down at me from that elevated angle, her cool green irises darkening, distant and unreadable. You slipped. Yes, ma'am. Melting snow dampened the marble floor. The mirror shattered. I will pay for the replacement. There is no need, she cut me off, her tone carrying a thin, worn exhaustion, as if she'd spent years mustering strength to deliver a long-awaited speech only to find all resolve drained away waiting for the right moment. A mirror is trivial, worth nothing. Did you sustain any other injuries? I shook my head. Silence stretched between us, flooding the room like rising cold water, creeping over carpet edges, wrapping around the stool legs to pool icy at my knees. I waited for her to continue. No one in this household uttered a phrase like 17 years have passed without a heavy revelation, demand, or unalterable verdict trailing close behind. But she said nothing further. She simply sat fixed on the snowfall outside the window, white flakes twisting and drifting between park branches, clinging to the glass as if begging silently for entry. The gray afternoon light bleached her profile translucent, sharp bone structure carved clean as a blade, no softness anywhere along her jaw or nose. Finally, she waved one hand dismissively. You may leave. Walk more carefully through the corridors from now on. I stood and retreated. Pausing before closing the door, I glanced back. She remained frozen in that identical posture, hands folded across her lap, gaze locked on the snow, a wax figure trapped inside a snowbound mansion. Mrs. Tanning had swept every shard of glass from the corridor by the time I returned, marble polished to a flawless reflective sheen that mirrored my bowed head as I passed. I retreated to the staff wing, shutting my tiny room's door behind me. The courtyard fern wilted in the freezing snow, fronds curled tight, thin frost crusting every leaf edge. I sank onto the military cot and dragged my leather trunk out from the corner, flipping the lid open. The chocolate wrappers were long discarded, yet dark brown permanent stains marred the cotton trunk lining, dried residue like salt flats left behind by an evaporated lake. I slid my fingers across the hardened discoloration, cold and stiff beneath my touch, impossible to scrub away. Preston and Annabelle's wedding was scheduled for early June, hosted at the Sterling's private Georgian waterfront estate on Long Island's South Shore, a creamy white mansion facing the Atlantic Ocean, rolling lawns trimmed into sharp geometric hedgerows stretching out behind the home. Wedding planning kicked off in March. Caroline personally vetted the floral supplier, importing white hydrangeas and lily of the valley straight from the Netherlands, and hand-selected a 3 Michelin-starred chef who spent 3 weeks rearranging 12-course menus and matching wine pairings for the reception. Mr. Sterling donated the estate grounds as the venue and covered the full cost of a string symphony orchestra. My assigned duty involved preparing Preston's wedding tuxedo the night before the ceremony. The 3-piece charcoal morning suit had been custom-tailored for him on London's Savile Row, woven from a wool mohair blend with exceptional drape. It arrived encased in a walnut-hard garment trunk plastered with fragile and this side-up shipping stickers. I unlatched the trunk one sun-drenched afternoon, golden light flooding Preston's south-facing suite to catch the mohair fibers woven into the lapels, glinting with thousands of faint silver flecks. I ran a garment steamer over the shoulders, front panels, and trouser creases, even though the suit had arrived perfectly pressed from overseas, then hung it front and center on the most prominent hanger inside his walk-in closet. Tucked into the jacket's hidden breast pocket rested a pair of vintage silver cufflinks, purchased by Preston at a London winter auction the year prior, Victorian antiques etched with twisting vine scrollwork, each center set with a tiny obsidian stone the size of a grain of rice. I removed the cufflinks and polished them 3 times with a velvet cloth, holding them up to the light to examine the obsidian facets, deep dark green undertones shimmering faintly within the black stone. I tested the spring clasp on each link, confirming no looseness, before sliding them back into the jacket pocket and smoothing the suit's lapels closed once more. Preston returned home as dusk fell. He stepped off the elevator dressed in a windbreaker and jeans, hair tousled by coastal wind, relaxed weariness softening his features after hours spent outdoors. He paused outside the closet doorway, leaning his head in to glance at the hanging charcoal suit. "Everything ready?" he asked. "All set." The cufflinks were inspected as well. He crossed the room to stand beside me, studying his wedding attire while his shoulder hovered barely 8 inches from mine. I caught the faint lingering outdoor scent clinging to his jacket, fresh cut grass, fine dust, and a faint salty tang carried inland from the ocean. He did not glance my direction as he spoke. "I always trust you with these things." The words floated light and weightless, a phrase he'd repeated countless times before. "Cece, tidy this for me. Cece, leave that alone, I'll handle it. Cece, I trust your work implicitly." Together, They formed a loose frayed rope strung between our two worlds, appearing sturdy enough to cling to, yet snapping clean the moment I dared pull too hard. I kept my gaze lowered. "Thank you, sir." "Quit calling me sir," he replied, faint exasperation lacing his tone, the familiar lazy irritation he never bothered to fully mask. "I've told you dozens of times." "My apologies, Preston." He turned his head to face me. Slanted sunset light streamed through a narrow ventilation window cut into the closet wall, gilding one side of his cheekbone and jawline in warm amber. His expression defied simple labeling, equal parts kindness, quiet scrutiny, and the distant detachment he reserved for household staff, layered beneath a quiet unspoken curiosity, as if someone walking a maze had suddenly paused to glance backward at the path they traveled. "Cece," he said abruptly, "where will you stand during the wedding ceremony?" Mrs. Tanning assigned me to wait along the side veranda, ready to assist Miss Sterling with any requests. His eyebrows drew together in a faint frown. "You're not merely staff," he cut himself off mid-sentence, the unfinished thought stuck like a fruit pit caught in his throat before he rephrased carefully. "Position yourself somewhere you can see everything clearly, don't hide behind pillars. You've spent 3 months coordinating every last detail of this wedding, you deserve to watch it unfold." "I understand." He fell silent for a beat, then lifted a hand to ruffle my hair. The same casual, fleeting gesture as always, brushing past my head like a butterfly skimming my shoulder. This time, though, his palm lingered a full second longer than usual, warmth seeping through my hair to settle light against the thin bone of my skull. He pulled his hand away and turned to exit the closet, his voice echoing down the hallway as he departed. "Take the box of macarons Annabelle brought home tonight. They make me drowsy if I eat sweets." I stood frozen in the closet, the faint warmth left by his palm slowly fading from the crown of my head. Sunset deepened outside the windows, stretching the suit's long shadow thin across the carpet like an overturned blade. The morning of the wedding dawned impossibly clear, the Long Island sky a vivid saturated blue unlike anything I'd ever seen. The Sterling's lawn had been manicured to the smooth uniform texture of woven wool, a cream canvas tent erected at the lawn center, 180 folding chairs lined in neat fan-shaped rows tied with champagne silk ribbons. Each chair back was wrapped with small bundles of lily of the valley and baby's breath, pure white blooms blending soft gray sprigs into a gentle gradient in the morning sunlight. Ocean breezes rolled inland carrying sharp salt tang and the bright green aroma of freshly cut grass. White sailboats drifted slow across the Atlantic horizon, billowing sails unfurled like folded accordions. I wore a faded charcoal gray staff uniform pulled from the housekeeper's storage closet, Mrs. Tanning declaring the muted shade would keep me unobtrusive along the veranda. The fit was ill-suited to my frame, shoulders an inch too broad, cuffs dragging past my wrists with frayed worn edges. I folded the cuffs inward and pinned the fabric hidden on the inside with a safety pin, stitching a replacement gray plastic button to the front where one had torn loose, triple knotting the thread to secure it fast. 30 minutes before the ceremony began, guests filtered onto the lawn to take their seats. I lingered tucked into the shadow of a massive white marble column lining the main hall side veranda, the pillar wide enough to conceal my entire frame, swallowing me into a dark gray backdrop. Through gaps between the column and climbing flower trellises, I watched the lawn unfold before me. Caroline walked arm in arm with Richard toward the front row wearing a cream Chanel suit and wide-brimmed Philip Tracy fascinator, sheer netting veiling fluttering soft as she moved. Her smile was mathematically precise, drawn with a compass's steady hand. Richard rarely paused to take phone calls that day, dressed in navy-tailored blazer with a crisp white pocket square peeking out, shaking every guest's hand with calibrated pressure and timing, a spring wound tight to perfect specifications. The front doors of the main mansion remained closed. Annabelle's 6 bridesmaids wandered the front terrace in matching blush pink gowns, adjusting layered tulle skirts, fluffing bouquets, giggling softly as they posed for phone photos. Sunlight gilded their styled curls and intricate updos, each girl polished and glossy as hand-painted porcelain museum figurines lined up in a neat row. Then Preston appeared. He stepped out from a side entrance on the mansion's opposite side, walking down a white carpet runner leading straight to the floral wedding arch. The charcoal morning suit draped flawless across his frame, a single stem of imported Dutch lily of the valley pinned to his lapel, matching the blooms tied to every guest chair. His hair trimmed short and neat, exposing a clean forehead and sharp jawline. Morning sun dusted one side of his face with pale golden light. He nodded politely to acquaintances seated on either side of the aisle, lips curved in a practiced, pleasant smile. As he passed the marble column concealing me, his footsteps slowed marginally. His gaze drifted toward the shaded veranda, locking onto my hidden silhouette for a split second. He tilted his chin in the faintest, nearly imperceptible nod only I could recognize as directed at me, his lips shaping two words lost to wind and ocean waves, but I read the lip movement clearly. Step forward. I stayed rooted behind the pillar. Mrs. Tanning's orders dictated I remain stationed within the veranda's shadowed zone. Stepping out into the sunlit lawn would cross the line of my assigned post. Preston held my gaze for 2 full heartbeats before his groomsmen guided him onward toward the ceremony arch. The wedding march struck up. A string quartet tucked beneath the tent's corner played a reimagined string arrangement of Bach's air on the G string, notes drifting out to weave seamlessly with the steady crash of ocean waves. The mansion's main double doors swung open. Annabelle emerged, draped in a mermaid lace wedding gown with a 10-foot train held carefully aloft by 2 young flower girls. Hand-sewn lily of the valley lace embroidery covered fabric from neckline down to her hips, glowing soft pale gold beneath sunlight, mirroring the real blooms decorating every chair. Honey blonde hair half loose half up, threaded with a delicate strand of tiny pearl beads that tinkled faint against one another as she walked. She linked arms with her father Walter Sterling. Dressed in a deep navy suit paired with silver-gray tie and folded white pocket square, his step steady and rigid, jaw clamped tight with suppressed emotion. His gaze swept slowly across every guest before landing squarely on the marble column hiding me. His gait faltered for half a heartbeat, a near-invisible pause. His right arm, the one wrapped around Annabelle's elbow, tensed hard in that instant. Annabelle tilted her head upward to whisper a quiet question, but her father did not reply, tearing his eyes away from my shadow and continuing forward toward the arch. In that fleeting pause, I watched his pupils blow wide, something deep inside his irises churning violently, as if he'd lifted the lid off an abandoned ancient well and spotted something he'd long believed lost forever resting at the bottom. The ceremony proceeded without flaw. The pastor recited scripture and wedding vows, Preston's voice steady and unwavering as he spoke as I do, Annabelle's tone softened with perfectly timed delicate tears. They exchanged plain platinum wedding bands engraved with each other's initials on the inner band. When Preston bent to kiss his bride, a strong gust of wind billowed the tent's white canvas sides, snapping loud in the breeze. Annabelle's lace train lifted a thin layer, brushing against Preston's trousers like a wisp of white fog. I watched from the column's shadow, sunlight bright enough to make my eyes squint against the glare. My fingers curled tight around the marble pillar's rough cool stone, the safety pin fastening my folded cuff digging faint into my wrist. I traced the soft shift of Preston's jawline as he kissed Annabelle, the delicate tears clinging to her dark eyelashes, the collective quiet gasp of all 6 bridesmaids. A dull aching blow struck deep within my chest, light yet sharp, the bitter tang of unripe green apricots seeping through my teeth to creep down my jaw all the way to my earlobes. Post-ceremony cocktail hour unfolded across circular white linen tables lining the lawn's perimeter. A 12-tier champagne tower rose center stage, every glass base nested neatly into the cup below, the topmost flute scattering thousands of tiny golden light fragments beneath the sun. Guests milled between tables, clinking flutes, exchanging rapid soft Upper East Side chatter about couture gowns, tropical vacations, stock market gains, and children's private extracurricular schedules. I weaved between tables carrying a silver serving tray stocked with refilled champagne flutes, occasionally collecting empty glasses and discarded linen napkins. Midday's harsh white sunlight softened into warm golden late afternoon glow, the ocean surface rippling with scattered shards of reflected light, wind shaking lily of the valley bouquets until loose white petals drifted down onto tablecloths like minuscule pale dust. I passed one round table when a voice called my name. Cece. I turned my head. Walter Sterling stood a few paces away, a champagne glass gripped loosely in his hand barely touched, the liquid still calm with slow rising bubbles. His expression warped strangely, as if a faded watercolor painting had been suddenly covered in mist, all pigment smudging and rearranging itself anew. His stare held shock, sharp scrutiny, and a crushing, slowly unraveling grief threatening to overwhelm him entirely. Mr. Sterling. I inclined my head slightly, lowering the serving tray toward the ground. May I assist you with anything? He ignored the question, stepping one pace closer and setting his untouched champagne glass down on the nearest tabletop. His steps remained steady, yet his breathing grew shallow and rapid, the front of his suit jacket rising and falling visibly with every inhale. His eyes traced my features methodically, sliding from my eyes to my hair, high cheekbones, sharp jawline, matching a faded sketch against a long-forgotten face. How old are you? He asked. 17, sir. 17. The two syllables landed heavy as a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward to touch a hidden boundary deep within my consciousness I'd never known existed. 17 years ago, on the 11th of May, were you born at St. Mary's Hospital on Long Island South Shore? My fingers clamped hard around the silver tray's edge, the metal warming beneath my grip as all blood retreated from my fingertips, leaving cold, numb tingling. I don't know, sir, I answered, my voice steadier than I anticipated, calm as a deep lake hiding unmeasured depths beneath an unrippled surface. My adoption papers list birthplace and biological parents as unknown. Mr. Sterling squeezed his eyes shut for a prolonged stretch, long enough I feared he might collapse on the spot. When he opened them again, cracks spiderwebbed outward from the center of his dark brown pupils, ice melting slow in tepid water, fissures spreading millimeter by millimeter across his irises. Beneath your left shoulder blade, he whispered, volume lowered to carry only between us, is there a copper penny-sized birthmark the color of burnt red cinnabar? Every muscle in my spine locked rigid. I'd seen that mark countless times in the bathroom mirror, round, pale crimson, stamped into my skin like a worn old coin seal. Painless, unremarkable, a secret I'd guarded my entire life. I never wore off-the-shoulder clothing, avoided swimming in the Winthrops' private pool entirely. That birthmark had lain buried beneath my skin for 17 years, a coin hidden underground I'd assumed would never be unearthed by anyone else. I stared back at him without replying, yet my silence delivered confirmation clear as speech. Walter Sterling drew a deep, ragged breath, his chest expanding wide enough to stretch a thin crease across his tailored suit jacket. He twisted to face the crowd of laughing, drinking guests scattered across the lawn, spine stiffening as if ready to shed decades of constructed lies. Everyone, may I have your attention? His voice boomed loud and raw, a silent drum struck violently after years of disuse. Please quiet down, I need to speak to all of you. The string music cut off instantly. Glass clinks, murmured conversation, and gentle laughter vanished mid-syllable, swept away as if sliced clean with a blade. Only wind and ocean tide remained audible across the lawn, every 180 guests swiveling heads toward Mr. Sterling standing beside the champagne tower. His face flushed crimson, necktie askew, one white-knuckled fist wrapped tight around the table edge, the other arm extended straight to point directly at my position by the marble column. This marriage cannot move forward. His shout tore from deep within his ribcage. The Winthrops have lied to me for 30 years, they've lied to every single one of you. That young woman standing beside the pillar, she is the Winthrops' biological daughter, their firstborn child, Preston's twin sister. Chaos erupted across the lawn simultaneously. 180 wealthy men and women in custom formal wear gasped as a collective single unit. A guest knocked over a champagne flute, glass shattering sharp amid the sudden roar of overlapping whispers, tiny splinters of sound piercing the air. Several attendees reached for cell phones, others restrained their wrists mid-movement. Chairs scraped against manicured grass as guests shot upright then dropped back down again. Caroline surged to her feet behind the main table, her cream suit blindingly bright beneath the sun, lips trembling uncontrollably, emerald diamond studs refracting cold harsh light onto her ashen jaw, transforming her likeness into a cracked plaster statue. Richard strode forward through the rows of seating to seize Mr. Sterling's shoulder, only to be shoved roughly backward with a single swat of his palm. "Do not touch me, Richard." Walter's voice shook violently, each word scraped rough against sandpaper. 30 years ago you pressed me to sign documents claiming a stillborn infant, promising proper private disposal of the body. You forced me, your own legal counsel, to cover up a horrific deception. You erased your daughter's birth records, stripped her of every legal inheritance right, locked her into household staff labor for 17 full years. For 17 years she's waited tables, folded linens, cleaned your home as an invisible ghost, while Preston skied the Swiss Alps, ordered bespoke suits in London, and played his grand Steinway in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. Tell me, Richard, where is the polished prestige in this? Where is the justice? Annabelle pushed through the cluster of bridesmaids, her gown's lengthy train tangling around her ankles and sending her stumbling forward, crying out a broken "Father." Mr. Sterling shot a glance toward his daughter, his brown eyes flooding with a despair I'd never witnessed in any grown man, regret, apology, utter powerlessness facing irreversible damage that could never be undone. "I'm so sorry, Annabelle," he said. "I never intended to reveal this today. But I cannot wait another moment. Once you sign the marriage license, legal recourse becomes impossible. I cannot let you marry into a family rotten to its very core." Annabelle clapped a hand over her mouth, frozen mid-step in her 10-foot lace gown, honey curls whipped across half her face by the ocean wind. Her gaze flickered rapidly back and forth between Preston and me, lips parted slightly without a single sound escaping. Preston stood motionless beneath the floral wedding arch, never shifting an inch from the moment Walter Sterling's accusation first spilled forth. Color drained steadily from his charcoal suit-clad frame, receding from cheekbones to lips to earlobes like watercolor pigment dissolving when submerged, bleeding outward from the edges inward until his skin turned pale as paper. His eyes stretched wide, fixed unblinking on my figure, the unreadable haze lingering in his irises finally resolving into one clear truth: collapse. Everything he'd built his identity upon crumbled inside him in real time: walls, an entire mansion, a life he'd inhabited 17 years blind to the foundational lie, tilting, splitting, shattering into rubble piece by piece. He breathed the nickname out, sound thin as wind-tossed leaf drifting slow before hitting the ground. I remained anchored behind the marble column, late afternoon sunlight stretching my shadow long across the gravel path edging the lawn. My hand still gripped the silver serving tray. Somewhere amid the commotion, a champagne flute had been knocked off, only one glass left balanced on the tray's corner, pale gold liquid residue glinting beneath the sun. Slowly, deliberately, I uncurled my fingers. The tray clattered down onto the grass at my feet, bouncing once softly, the rim tapping against a small stone to emit a faint tiny ding. I lifted my gaze to meet Preston's stare. His lips moved, yet no sound carried across the crowd separating us. Groomsmen closed in around him, friends clapped his shoulders, murmured quiet reassurances, their bodies blocking my view for a moment before parting again, his line of sight cutting straight through the throng to lock back onto mine. Whatever emotion churned in his eyes shifted beyond total collapse into something unidentifiable, likely something he himself could not parse. For years to come, he would unpack and define the truth of who Cece truly was, a revelation poised to uproot every unexamined assumption he'd ever held about his world. Several male guests stepped forward to steady Walter Sterling, guiding him slowly toward the main mansion, his gait unsteady yet spine held rigid upright. Bridesmaids surrounded Annabelle on the opposite side, her wedding gown dragging a long pale white streak across the lawn grass as they herded her away. Guests scattered into small clusters, some dialing phones, others engaging in hushed heated debate, a few merely standing distant to watch the unraveling spectacle, equal parts fascinated and disturbed by witnessing a wealthy dynasty's implosion firsthand. Mrs. Tanning pushed through the crowd's outer perimeter toward me, clad in her standard charcoal staff uniform, gray hair pinned back in an immaculate tight bun, her face carved into the same weathered stone neutrality I knew so well. When she reached my side, her lips trembled faintly before she squeezed her eyes shut. In that split second, a glint of moisture caught the sunlight at her lash line, vanishing instantly as she swiped it away quick with the edge of her thumb. "Come back inside," she said, voice lowered far softer than usual. "Don't remain out here, every pair of eyes will fixate on you." I stared at Mrs. Tanning. She'd never spoken words intended to shield me before. She'd managed me, supervised my chores, corrected missteps, deflected Caroline's harsher reprimands on my behalf, but this was different. Protection carried warmth, covering my mistakes was merely part of her job description. She'd executed her role with mechanical precision for 17 years, yet that thumb brushing away hidden tears was a gesture I recognized instantly after observing every micro-expression of hers for nearly my entire life. "Mrs. Tanning," I said, my tone flat and drained, linen iron thin for decades until fabric frayed fragile, ready to tear at the slightest pull. "Who am I, truly?" She met my gaze, ocean wind loosening several strands of gray hair from her bun to float against her cheeks. Her tear-wiped hand hung loose at her side, fingers curling inward as if grasping for something lost forever. "You are Cecilia Winthrop," she replied, each word dragged upward from a depth far beneath the surface. "Richard and Caroline's biological daughter. Preston's older sister. You were born at 6:03 in the morning on the 11th of May, 17 years ago, 11 full minutes before Preston drew his first breath." I nodded once. My shoulders trembled subtly, yet no tears fell. My eye sockets burned hot, yet moisture refused to spill over. I thought of the crumpled note tucked beneath my cot's straw mattress, the chocolate box spoiled by summer heat, the strawberry pudding pressed into my lap years prior, every fleeting warm gesture left to spoil and stain the lining of my trunk. 17 years of suppressed memory crashed down all at once, a brick wall toppling forward to bury me in darkness, yet I stayed standing, feet planted firm on the grass, hands limp at my sides. Mrs. Tanning turned away, spine straight as ever, walking slowly along the gravel path toward the mansion's side entrance, each step tentative as testing whether the ground beneath her would hold steady. Her long shadow stretched thin across the lawn, overlapping with wilted lily-of-the-valley blooms caught in the wind, a faded film reel fading frame by frame. Twilight rose over the Atlantic shoreline, the sun sinking beneath the horizon to bleed the sky crimson, mauve, then deep indigo, like silk fabric dipped gradually into dark dye. The ocean breeze turned crisp, carrying damp evening chill across the lawn. Guest groups dispersed one by one, the tense string lights flickered on all at once, warm yellow tiny glows floating midair like fireflies. I stood alone beside the marble column, wind tugging loose the safety pin holding my uniform's folded cuff, fabric slipping down to hang loose around my wrist. Tiny scabs dotted my palms left by broken mirror glass the prior evening, barely visible beneath the soft artificial lamp glow. I turned slowly, walking along the gravel path toward the mansion's side entryway. After a few paces, I paused and glanced down at the lawn beneath my shoes. A loose bundle of lily-of-the-valley had blown free from one chair back, white blooms clustered tight swaying gentle in the night wind. I bent to scoop it off the grass, stems still damp, pale green sap seeping from broken cut ends to stain my fingertips faint. I clutched the flowers in one hand and pushed open the side door. The mansion's interior corridor fell silent, wall sconces casting dim warm amber light across framed portraits of Winthrop ancestors, their painted faces appearing softer in shadow, a trick of illumination only, I knew full well. I traversed the quiet hallway, passing the kitchen, laundry room, housekeeper's office, then the narrow single-file staff corridor, finally pushing open my unnumbered bedroom door. The military cot, rickety wooden shelf, and battered leather trunk all remained exactly where I'd left them. I stepped inside and latched the door shut, sliding down the wooden surface to settle onto cold concrete flooring. The lily of the valley bouquet rested beside my knees, white petals glowing faint pale luminescence in the dim room. I buried my face into the crook of my arm, shoulders shaking at last, muffled quiet sobs trapped deep in my throat, a muted low hum like a cello wrapped tight in thick cloth. 17 years of suppressed emotion surged forth unimpeded, every polished-over slight, every hidden wound, every spoiled moment of fleeting warmth sealed away inside my trunk, flooding over me in a long overdue downpour, soaking through every layer of my carefully constructed composure. I lost track of how long I sat there before footsteps echoed down the far end of the staff corridor, light and slow, advancing step by step until they halted outside my thin wooden door. Separated only by a single panel of timber, I could hear uneven, strained breathing held back tight. Then Preston's voice filtered through the wood, rougher and thinner than I'd ever heard it, crumpled paper spread flat to speak. "Cece." I offered no reply, pressing my palm flat against the cool door grain. The outside breathing paused for several heartbeats before he spoke again, volume dropped to a near whisper. "I never knew. Truly, until today, I had no idea any of this existed." He still called me Cece, the nickname he'd used my entire life, a label now irreparably redefined by the day's catastrophic revelation. I understood he required time to absorb the truth, to process the sudden inversion of every role he'd ever known. Perhaps he too would retreat to a private room, bury his face in his hands, and let the wreckage of his world settle slow around him. I wondered what thoughts churned behind his wide shocked eyes as he stood beneath the wedding arch surrounded by well-meaning friends. "Are you all right?" he asked. I pressed my lips lightly against the wood grain to murmur a quiet response. "I'm fine." Silence stretched outside for several beats, then I felt his palm press flat against the door, a line nearly level with my own hand on the opposite side. Separated solely by a thin plank, I could sense the outline of his palm, warm, faint sweat dampening his skin against the timber. "I'll come find you first thing tomorrow morning," he said. "We need to talk properly. Will you let me?" "Yes." His hand lifted from the door, footsteps receding slowly down the narrow corridor, rounding the bend and fading entirely. The staff wing fell silent once more, night air seeping through my window crack to brush the lily of the valley petals trembling faint beside my legs. I sat back against the door, staring out the tiny window at a strip of dark indigo sky above the courtyard wall. Storm clouds scattered partially to reveal one faint pale yellow blurred star hanging low overhead. The scrawny courtyard fern unfurled its frost-kissed fronds, melted dew droplets glinting tiny beneath the distant starlight. My mind drifted back to late afternoon sunlight gilding Preston's charcoal wedding suit, mohair fibers shimmering with thousands of fine silver flecks as he stood beneath the floral arch. I recalled his quiet line in the walk-in closet, "I always trust you with these things," lazy and unhurried as words pulled out from beneath a pillow. I remembered that split-second glance he'd cast toward my shadowed column during the processional, collapse etched clear deep within his pupils. Tomorrow morning he would return. Would he address me as Cece still, or use the name printed on my forgotten birth certificate, Cecilia? I could not predict the answer. Regardless of what he called me, the spoiled chocolate stains embedded permanently into my trunk's cotton lining would never wash away, worn indelible as part of the fabric itself. Those small gestures that once sparked fragile warmth had curdled into aching hurt, now merely static marks mapped onto a misdrawn path, permanent proof of the 17 years I'd spent bent and twisted out of place. Night dew condensed on the fern's thin leaves beneath the faint starlight. I lifted the lily of the valley bouquet and laid it gently atop my cot's pillow, white petals glowing faint in the shadowed room. I peeled off the ill-fitting charcoal staff uniform, folding it neatly to rest on the lowest shelf of my wooden rack, slipping into my faded soft cotton nightgown before stretching out across the military cot, drawing the thin wool blanket up to my jaw. Everything would wait until morning. Tomorrow stretched long ahead of me. The sun would rise over the Atlantic shoreline, casting light over every broken fragment scattered across the lawn today. Some pieces might fit back together again, others would remain fractured permanently. Either way, every shard would catch the dawn light, glinting one by one, a permanent reminder that I'd survived 17 years trapped inside this cramped courtyard bedroom, trapped along a warped path, living as nothing more than my own shadow.